answers to these kinds of questions. Okay? If applicable, please provide names of lawyers, accountants, etc. Don't worry about that, because once you start to put their names down formally, you end up with a requirement to pay them. And you don't want to do that. You want them all to volunteer. If they're prepared to have their names down as a volunteer, that's great. So this is all about the organization, all about the formation. That's really a couple of months to make that happen for the groups that are not already there. That's, I think, your goal before Christmas. If you can get it done by January 1st, that's important. Now, the proposed use. I've heard many, many thoughts. Bob gave a lot of great examples, and we had a few examples from here of situations that people have thought about ideas. One that came to me last night when Bob was talking, and I'm seeing it in a certain situation. If you've got a few buildings on the site, the buildings can be used for many purposes. Would you love to spend a week with your family in a house at a lighthouse? Simple. Those sorts of things are revenue generators, but there are many uses. Be flexible enough to say that the goals and objectives, but then how will we achieve them? What do we think we can do? Make a long list of things that can be done, and over time, they may set how you move forward and what you add over a period of time. I suppose what I really need to say is this is the time that you need to set a 2-year plan, a 4-year plan, and a 6-year plan. In other words, what will we do first, second, and third? Or what do we intend to do? And do a little bit more dreaming on the third phase of this. The first phase is the practical, down-to-earth, what can be done as soon as we take it over. The second is, if we partner with some group, what could we do in the second 2-year cycle or phase? And the third is, where do we really want to start dreaming and move forward with some great ideas? If we're involved for 4 years, those other 2 years we're going to have 100 ideas, because we're going to be involved with other similar people who are making their properties, their sites work with many different ways. Whether it be research and development, research partnerships with the community colleges, with the universities, with schools. Days to learn, learning days. Every June, most schools send every class out to do something. The whole class goes out. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have classes go to learn about the geology of your lighthouse, or the bird watching in your lighthouse? All of the things that are wonderful assets that are located near our lighthouses, they can learn. It's a learning experience, an outdoor learning experience. And in a controlled environment, because they're normally on points so that they can't get beyond you if you stand back and watch.
Probably the most important point is that people who visit lighthouses, and Bob and Nan can testify to this, they want to get in that lighthouse. They want the inside experience with it. In some cases, for insurance and liability reasons, only access to the first floor is permitted. But as David says, this is more of a concern after the transfer takes place. Then you can talk with your own insurance, and Denise is going to speak to that issue this afternoon. But these places do lend themselves very well. If anybody that's visited PEI and has toured any lighthouse over there knows, like Point Prim is a great example. You can go right to the top, and there's displays on each floor of our old artifacts and local history and things like that. Very important, but the key is, as John mentioned, the site has to be cleared as far as the environmental side of it goes, and that takes place before that transfer is done. So that's not a concern for us. Number two, and a very important issue, is the liability. Yeah. Like, are the stairs safe to climb? Peggy's Cove, good example of that. Before anybody can get into Peggy's, if and when the province takes it over, changes have to be made. So liability is a concern, but the big thing to remember is that they are great places to show people. You know, they want to at least get in the door and look around. Sample the beautiful smell that's in most of these lighthouses, the old kerosene smell and so on. But that's something I think that we can cross down the road after the transfer takes place. So.
There's a reasonable assumption that when the agreement is signed, there'll not be environmental issues, possibly. Repairs are a different thing, but environmental issues should be solved in that agreement. Yes. Okay? And so the intended uses, put it in terms of steps. Dream a bit, be very practical, and somewhere in between. So set some sort of, and that will require your whole group to sit down and say, what do we think we can accomplish in the first couple of years? What would we love to do or have several years down the road? And somehow set it into phases. It makes it a lot simpler to understand, and it also supports your financial picture. That's the key, that everything meshes. The first few years may be very few expenses because you have very few resources and revenues. So plan it over a period of time, and that's what they're looking for. You can put a long list, but you may want to phase it as, we think this can be done early, we think through partnerships we can do this in the middle, and down the road we'd love to see. That's what you're doing in this sheet. Okay? The next is operations and maintenance. This is where the earlier effort to get a municipality on side may be necessary or useful. We pay the taxes in municipalities, so we in the end determine how the money is spent. It's not automatic. We don't just say we want it spent on. That we needs to be a large group of people. You do that through people in your group participating on an active level at a municipal level. Maybe it's being elected if you have a goal and a desire, but at the same time you always have to let your municipal units, who are your key funding agent for locally based sites owned by a community group or owned by a municipality, they're going to be your key resource in this. But you set the direction for your municipal unit through elections, through representations to municipal units. So utilize them. In addition to that, the heritage standards, make sure you check that, because that's going to come out in the agreement, will clearly state that they must maintain the heritage standards based upon the guidelines that are in place at that time of the agreement. So that's going to be in the agreement, so don't ignore it. Public access is another key. It may be to the site or on the site. On the site is something that you use to benefit through programs. There are many programs that will allow accessibility grants. So on the site, if you want to access, there are opportunities to do that that will have grant programs attached to them, whether they be municipal, provincial, or federal. Keep those in your plans. If you'd like to make your lighthouse, as you mentioned, accessible, how do we do it? Accessible at the top, how do we do it? Someone's going to dream up something that does work. It may be an interactive for the first period of time, it may be an active one, and that would be a wonderful opportunity. But at the same time, dream it, because we may find some fund that comes in. If we're active politically on a municipal level, that will help us when we're looking at maintenance of the site or the access to the site. If there are roads, you need to be on the list for paving. If you don't want paving, you need to be on the list for clearing of brush and the ditching. We do have flooding at places near the water, don't we? I think we've lived with that recently very much. Maybe we will today, we don't know. But there are issues with water in a lot of communities, and access to a site that may be impacted by flow of water can be very tough. So you need to make sure there's ditching, and that's where your municipal units can come in and help you too, because you make it an issue for them. The community wants to access this lighthouse, but we can't let the community do it because the roads are continually washing out. Who do you go to talk about that? You go to your municipal unit.
Okay, this is a question that's come up a lot with heritage standards. If you look online for those heritage standards to do with the Heritage Letters Protection Act, you'll find a set of criteria and guidelines that are in there. And like I tell people, it's mostly, you know, just a common sense approach that we'd like people to take here. For instance, if you've got a lighthouse built, like in the case of Terrence Bay in 1904, 1905, you know, they didn't have final windows in 1904. So if a window, you know, we encourage people to take care of the windows they have, but in the event it has to be replaced, you know, you don't have to search the country to find a heritage carpenter who will charge you $10,000 to replace the window. There's usually people in the community that can do stuff like that, but it's not, there's going to be no heritage lighthouse cops patrolling the country after this act is over, you know, checking windows and that. We ask people just to respect the architecture of the way it was built, you know, and not to, you know, to drastically alter the architecture of the building. Or in the case of Terrence Bay as a prime example, where the lantern room on the top was removed by Coast Guard at one point. When that lantern room is built back on to get plans, Coast Guard up plans for all these old buildings, and to, you know, to replace it in a way that respects the architecture of the day. But it doesn't have to be, like I said, people could sometimes get carried away and think it's going to cost them a fortune to hire heritage carpenters and so on. That's not the case at all.
No.
I mean, if you have a heritage carpenter, that's great, but I just wanted to kind of set your mind at rest that that's not a really major issue here.
Thank you, Barry.